What's driving the resurgence of populism, both to the right and to the left, is the failure of the neoliberal economic model. That is a model that in developed world democracies has delivered almost no improvements in terms of income for many ordinary people. Now, after 2008, there was clearly a banking crisis. The state stepped in, saved the banks, but many people feel that they were left behind by governments and parties of all kinds. So what you've seen is the look to the extremes in politics and people looking away from established elitist politicians who seem to believe that they have no duty to communicate or to live a similar life as the people they're supposed to represent.
Explanation of the rise of populism is actually the collapse of traditional political structures. For 100 years we had political parties that were organised around socialism on the one hand and opposition to socialism on the other. Part of that, socialism in effect collapsed as a serious intellectual or practical doctrine with the market revolution of the 1980s and with the end of the Cold War. And oddly, that not only deprived parties of the left of part of their rationale, but it removed part of the rationale for the traditional parties of the right, because they had been coalitions of people, various rather disparate groups, people with traditional religious affiliations, old-fashioned conservatives, neoliberals, and so on. These people represented the right, had very little in common except opposition to a socialist doctrine. The result of that is that the organisation of parties both on the left and on the right has largely collapsed. The central fact we have to recognise is that the people who voted in Britain for Brexit or in the US for Trump are not people who are poor. On average, their incomes are higher. The real predictive factors in both countries are not income, but age and education. It's older people and it's less educated people who voted for Trump and Brexit. And these are by far the two strongest indicators of which side of these votes people would have been found on.
Both Donald Trump's victory and Brexit happened because of two new divisions that we're seeing in these troubled Western democracies. One is the division between the young and the old. The young have borne the brunt of the post-2008 crisis. Older people haven't. Many of their pensions have been protected here in the UK, also in the United States. And they also tend to be nostalgic for a kind of capitalism that worked, that was less global and less multi-ethnic. Now on top of that, you've got this new problem of the different lifestyle of the city and the small town. In a city, even if you're poor, as many people are here in London, it is easier to survive in a globalised world. You can drive a taxi, you can do 2 or 3 jobs, and at the end of the day you can go to a nightlife that is spectacular no matter who you are. A small town with a dead high street, often with the power of religion being stronger in America than it would be in a big city, then attitudes are very different. For 30 years, nobody wanted to talk about class. Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, they all assumed that class differences would disappear as societies became more and more marketised. Now, everybody wants to talk about something called the white working class. The only problem is, it doesn't exist. I come from a white working class background. I've lived my life in the labour movement of Britain. It is multi-ethnic, it is predominantly female, the workforce, and people do not identify as a white working class. Some do, but I think we have to say it's a minority of people. So class really has re-emerged because of the failure of mainstream elite politicians to deliver to ordinary people.
Well, class has been a factor, but in a rather strange way, actually. That part of the success of both Brexit and Trump has been attracting traditional working class vote, whereas the far left populists, the Sanders and the Corbyns of the world, mainly attract their vote from a middle class, relatively well-educated minority group. So it's part of the story, but it's not been part of the story in which class has traditionally marked a left-right-wing division across the political spectrum. I think people are voting against their own economic interests because they don't understand really what their own economic interests are. These economic arguments in relation to Brexit or in relation to Trans-Pacific Partnership, these are complicated arguments, and they've been overwhelmed really by the crass simplicities of the Brexit camp or the Trump campaign. People don't understand, for example, the degree to which globalization has hastened the fall in inflation and reduced the price of a whole range of manufactured goods. That's a rather diffuse benefit to a wide range of people, which has been, for most people, entirely overshadowed by the relatively small numbers of people who've been directly affected because their jobs or their industries have migrated to other countries.
This phenomenon of the poor person who votes for the rich person, who, as we say in Britain, tugs their forelock in deference to the rich elite person, is not new. It's been with us for 200 years in industrial societies. We call it working class conservatism. What's happening now is that the appeal of elite right-wing politics has moved from rationality to irrationality. We have this term now in English, post-factual politics, where politicians, billionaires like Donald Trump, rich men like Nigel Farage, are prepared to use illogic, lies, to convince people.